$5,000. That's what it cost to have someone killed in Harlem in the late 1980s. Not by some kid on a corner, not by some crackhead with a pistol, by a professional operation with a former police officer on the payroll, a military veteran as the enforcer, and a basement in the Bronx where the walls had to be scrubbed with acid after every job. The men who did the work called themselves janitors. Some of them had tattoos, a mop and a bucket dripping with blood. $5,000, and they'd take any contract from anyone, against anyone. They didn't care who you were connected to. They didn't care whose protection you were under. Italian, Dominican, black. If the money hit the table, a body hit the floor. And after they killed you, they'd turn around and extort the person who hired them. Because if you needed someone else to do your dirty work, you were weak. And weakness was just another opportunity. The man who built this operation stood 6'7". He dropped out of school in the 4th grade. He was in juvenile detention by age 9. And by the time the FBI formed a special task force just to catch him, it had 30 agents dedicated to one man. He had 45 bodies to his name and the entire drug trade of Harlem under his boot. The Italian mob ran New York. 5 families, generations of power, and this man operated in their territory for 13 years, extorting the dealers they supplied, kidnapping people they protected, and not a single family moved against him. His name was Clarence Heatley. The streets called him Preacher. The FBI called him the Black Hand of Death. Harlem, 1953. Clarence Heatley was born into a neighborhood that had already been written off. The jazz clubs were fading, the brownstones were crumbling, and the corners were starting to fill with something new. He dropped out of school in the 4th grade. Think about that. 9 years old. Most kids that age are learning fractions. Clarence was learning how to survive on streets that would swallow you whole if you showed an ounce of softness. Before he turned 9, he was sent to juvenile detention. That's where his real education started. Not in a classroom. In a facility full of kids who had already decided that the world did not have a place for them, so they would make their own. By the time he came out, Clarence was different, taller, harder. He would eventually grow to 6'7", and he would spend the 1970s building a criminal record, including firearms possession and armed robberies, in and out of the system like it was a revolving door. But prison did not break him. It refined him. Every time he went in, he came out smarter, more patient, more dangerous. Throughout the 1970s, Heatley racked up conviction after conviction for firearms possession, armed robbery, and assault. He cycled through the system like it was a trade school. Go in, learn, come out, apply what you learned. Somewhere in those years, something clicked. Heatley realized that the dealers on the corners were making money. The gangs were making money. Even the Italian families running the numbers and the product were making money. But none of them were safe. Every one of them was vulnerable, not to the police, to someone willing to take what they had by force. He did not need to build an empire. He needed to build a toll booth and put it on the only road in town. He was building towards something. He just needed the right people. In 1983, Clarence Heatley met a man named John Cuff. Cuff was a police officer with the Housing Authority. Badge, gun, uniform. He was supposed to protect the people in New York City's public housing projects. Instead, he became the most dangerous enforcer in Harlem. Nobody knows exactly how it started. What is known is that Cuff began driving for Heatley while he was still on the force, still wearing the badge, still collecting a city paycheck. By day, he was an officer of the law. By night, he was chauffeur, bodyguard, and personal executioner for a man who would become the most feared criminal in New York. They called Cuff Big Coos. On the streets, they also called him Captain Jack Frost. There was a reason for that second name. Sources say Cuff preferred to strangle his victims with his bare hands. He didn't need a gun. He didn't need a weapon. He just needed his hands and the permission of the man sitting in the back seat. Together, Heatley and Cuff formed the core of what would become the Preacher Crew. And in 1983, they made it official. The name wasn't chosen for religion. It was chosen for fear. Clarence Heatley built his organization around a simple business model. You didn't have to sell product to make money in Harlem. You just had to tax the people who did. The Preacher Crew's primary income came from extortion. Every dealer in Harlem and the South Bronx had a choice: pay Preacher $10,000 to $30,000 or face the consequences. The payment bought you protection, not from the police, not from rival dealers, from him. And if you refused to pay, the Preacher Crew had a service for that too: $5,000 per body. They ran a murder-for-hire operation that accepted contracts from anyone. But here is what made them different from every other crew on the street. After they fulfilled a contract, they would turn on the person who hired them. The logic was cold. If you needed outside help to handle your problems, you were weak. And weak people had money that should belong to someone stronger. The crew operated out of two locations. Their street base was 144th Street and 8th Avenue in Manhattan, but their real headquarters was a building Preacher owned on the Grand Concourse in the Bronx. The basement of that building was where people disappeared. Victims were taken there, tortured, and killed. After the killing, the crew would pour acid on the bodies to dissolve tattoos and remove identifying marks. Then they would use power tools to dismember the remains. The pieces would be dumped in abandoned buildings across the city. After every job, the basement had to be scrubbed clean with boric acid. The men who did this work, the cleanup, called themselves janitors, and some of them got tattoos to prove it. A mop, a bucket, dripping with blood. This was not a street gang. This was an institution of terror. Heatley had two lieutenants. Cuff was the enforcer. The second was Anthony Boatwright, a military veteran who brought tactical discipline to the operation. Between them, they had every skill set covered. Heatley had the mind. Cuff had the badge and the hands. Boatwright had military training and zero hesitation. Preacher ran the crew like a cult. He had rules. No member could use product. No member could fight with another member. No member could steal from the crew. No member could inform on another member. The punishment for breaking any of these rules was death. And he meant it. Reports compared the Preacher Crew's internal culture to a cult: absolute obedience, absolute loyalty, absolute fear. One former member, a man known as Popcorn, said in a documentary that if Preacher had ordered him to kill his own mother, he would have done it. That's not a metaphor. That's what happens when fear becomes the foundation of everything. The Preacher Crew did not just target street-level dealers. They went after anyone with money. Anyone. According to multiple sources and media reports, in April 1993, the Preacher Crew kidnapped R&B singer Bobby Brown, the husband of Whitney Houston, and held him for ransom over a product debt. Whitney Houston allegedly paid the ransom. They also allegedly kidnapped music producer Teddy Riley. Now, these claims are widely reported but not independently confirmed through court records. What is confirmed is that the Preacher Crew kidnapped multiple high-value targets throughout the late 80s and 90s, and that their willingness to go after anyone, regardless of fame, wealth, or connections, is what made them unlike any other crew in the city. The Italian mob had rules. hierarchies, protocols. You did not touch certain people. You did not cross certain lines. Preacher had no lines. He extorted the same dealers the Italian families were supplying product to. He operated in Genevieve's family territory, Harlem and the Bronx, for 13 years. The five families controlled New York's underworld through structure and tradition, and none of them stopped him. Not because they could not. It was because the cost was not worth it. Preacher was not competition in the traditional sense. He was not trying to take their seat at the table. He was taxing the table itself. He was taking a cut of everything, the dealers, the distributors, the operations, without ever directly challenging the families. The Genovese family had roots in Harlem going back to the 1890s. They had operated there for 100 years. The 116th Street Crew, Fat Tony Salerno, the Palma Boys Social Club. This was their neighborhood, and Preacher ran a parallel government inside it. He walked into the most controlled criminal territory in America and said, "I do not work for you. You do not work for me, but everyone who works on these streets, they pay me." It was a position no one in New York had ever held before. Not Italian, not connected, just feared. December 5th, 1989. A 12-year-old boy named Donald Porter was walking to school in Harlem, Public School 92, 2 blocks from home. He never made it. Donald's older brother was Rich Porter, one of the biggest dealers in Harlem. The Preacher crew wanted $500,000 in ransom. One of their own members, a man named Johnny Apple Porter, was Donald's uncle. Velma Porter's own brother helped kidnap her youngest child. The kidnappers cut off Donald's index finger. They left it inside a coffee cup in the men's bathroom of a McDonald's on 125th Street, along with 2 of his rings and a cassette tape. On that tape, a 12-year-old boy's voice said, "They cutted my finger off. Please help me. Get the money. I love you, Mommy." When Rich Porter was killed by his partner Alpo Martinez on January 3, 1990, the ransom money died with him. And once the money was gone, they killed the boy. Donald's body was found in 14 black garbage bags at City Island in the Bronx. He was 12 years old. That kidnapping, the murder of a kid, is what finally made the FBI move. Before Donald, the Preacher crew was a local problem. After Donald, they became the FBI's problem. By 1994, cracks were forming inside the Preacher crew. Heatley's 2 lieutenants, Cuff and Boatwright, had been drifting apart. Both men were trying to position themselves as Preacher's right hand. Both were whispering in his ear. Both were telling him the other one needed to go. Preacher chose Cuff. On March 21, 1994, Boatwright was lured to the basement of Preacher's apartment building on the Grand Concourse, the same basement where so many others had been taken, the same basement that had to be scrubbed with acid after every job. This time, the job was on one of their own. Cuff shot Boatwright in the head. Then, with Preacher supervising, they used a circular saw to dismember the body. The severed arms and head were burned, and the remains were dumped in an abandoned building in Manhattan. Anthony Boatwright had been a military veteran and a founding member of the crew. He had cleaned up countless murder scenes as one of the original janitors. And he ended up on the same floor, in the same basement, getting the same treatment he'd given to so many others. The C-11 squad was formed specifically to take down the Preacher crew. 12 FBI agents, 3 DEA agents, 12 NYPD officers, 3 IRS agents. 30 people, all targeting one organization. They started flipping members, wiretaps, surveillance, building the case brick by brick. One crew member was arrested and agreed to cooperate. And then Preacher did something that showed either incredible boldness or total insanity. When the cooperating witness left a New York City courthouse after a hearing, Heatley and 3 associates followed him in a van. They were going to kidnap a federal witness in broad daylight outside a courthouse. Police stopped the van after a brief chase. Inside, they found 3 lead pipes, 4 gorilla masks, duct tape, and rope. Somehow, Heatley was not convicted for this, but the FBI was not going to let him slip again. On July 15, 1996, Clarence Heatley was indicted on 3 counts of murder and conspiracy to murder in the aid of racketeering. On August 12, 1996, the NYPD found him in the Bronx and placed him under arrest. They transported him to Harlem's 32nd Precinct. That same day, the FBI arrested John Cuff. By coincidence or by design, the 2 men were placed in the same holding cell. Less than 2 hours later, both were transferred to federal custody. Think about that for a second. The most feared man in Harlem, the Black Hand of Death, and they put him in a cell with his own lieutenant, the former cop who strangled people for a living, before transferring them both to the federal authorities. That's how confident law enforcement was that the wall was finally closing in. By November 1996, a 47-count federal indictment charged Heatley and 17 associates with trafficking, 11 murders, and 11 murder conspiracies. 14 of the suspects were arrested within days. Then, in December 1997, a second indictment was filed. 86 counts of racketeering, and this time the government played its biggest card, the drug kingpin statute. This law allowed prosecutors to seek the death penalty. Heatley was the first person in New York to face it. The man who had ordered 45 deaths was now staring at his own death. Clarence Preacher Heatley, the Black Hand of Death, the man who had a rule that anyone who informed on a crew member would be executed, became an informant. On February 5, 1999, Heatley pleaded guilty to racketeering and murder conspiracy in connection with 13 homicides. He cooperated with the federal government. He gave up names. He gave up operations. He gave up evidence. And then he gave up his own children. His son Shaka and his daughter had been involved in the crew's operations. When Preacher cooperated, he informed on them too, his own blood. Shaka would later describe the moment in a prison interview for the documentary The Son of Preacher, the Black Hand That Ruled Harlem. He said his sister whispered in his ear during a visit, "Daddy's telling on us." The man who killed anyone who broke the code of silence broke his own code to save himself. His attorney, Joel S. Cohen, explained the logic. There was no advantage to going to trial when a guilty plea guaranteed he would avoid execution. Cohen said Heatley wanted to spare his family the experience of watching him be put to death, but he did not spare them from prison. On May 14, 1999, Judge Michael B. Mukasey sentenced Clarence Preacher Heatley to 225 years. That sentence was designed so that even if Heatley lived to be 300 years old, he would die in a cell. John Cuff, the former housing police officer who strangled people with his bare hands, who shot Boatwright in the head, who was possibly the only man Preacher himself feared, received life plus 145 years. The Preacher crew was dismantled. Founding members scattered across federal prisons. Some cooperated. Some stayed loyal and received sentences that would outlive their grandchildren. Heatley was initially sent to the Federal Correctional Institution in Talladega, Alabama. He was later transferred to USP Coleman in Florida, where he remains today. He is in his early 70s. He will never see the outside of a prison again. In the courtroom, when given the chance to speak, Heatley said something that his victims never got the chance to hear. "I stand before the court, having committed such acts, knowing that water seeks its own level. If you do what you do, you get what you get." There is a question that nobody asks about the Preacher crew. How did they last so long? 13 years, from 1983 to 1996. 45 homicides, kidnappings of celebrities, extortion of every major dealer in Harlem and the Bronx, a torture basement on the Grand Concourse, a former cop as the chief enforcer, janitors with blood-soaked tattoos, and for 13 years, nobody stopped them. Not the NYPD, not the DEA, not the Italian families whose dealers were being extorted, not the Genovese family, who had roots in Harlem going back to the 1890s, not the Gambinos, not any of the 5 families. Nobody. The Italian mob controlled New York City's underworld through structure, tradition, and the commission. They had rules about who you could touch, who you could not, what lines you did not cross. Preacher Heatley had no rules. He did not answer to the commission. He did not respect territorial boundaries. He did not care whose supplier you were connected to. If you had money and you were on his streets, you paid. Period. And the families let it happen for 13 years because Preacher was not trying to replace them. He was taxing them. He sat outside the system and took a cut of everything that moved through it. He was the toll on the bridge, and the toll was non-negotiable. That's power, not the kind you inherit, not the kind you are given, the kind you take. With a 6'7" frame, a 4th grade education, a cop on your payroll, and a basement that had to be scrubbed with acid every week. $5,000 to kill anyone. The Italian mob could not stop him. The NYPD could not stop him. It took 30 federal agents, a special task force, and the threat of the death penalty to finally bring down the Black Hand of Death. And even then, he did not go down fighting. He went down talking. The man who killed anyone who snitched became the biggest snitch of them all. He gave up his crew, his lieutenants, his soldiers, his own children. Shaka sits in a cell because his father put him there. His daughter was exposed because her father handed her name to the government. The man who demanded absolute loyalty from everyone in his orbit, who executed Boatwright for being a potential threat, who had people dismembered for breaking the code, broke every rule he ever made the moment it was his life on the line. 45 bodies, 13 years, a torture basement in the Bronx, a former cop who strangled people with his hands, janitors with blood-dripping tattoos, a toll booth on the most dangerous streets in America, and it all ended with a man in a courtroom saying guilty to save his own skin. That's how the Black Hand of Death died, not with a bullet, with a whisper.